Our second present today comes from Steve Joordens from the University of Toronto. We thought 400 students were large when Bernardo was speaking, but we're going to talk for a few minutes, listen for a few minutes to Steve talk about experiential learning at scale for 2,000 students. So if you can, we can see your screens. Thank you, Steve. Take it away.
Thank you. Fantastic. And I'll try to keep an eye on the time as well. So by the way, I'm coming from the Canadian EdTech Summit, where I'm one of the co-chairs, and we're talking a lot of AI. So I see a lot of AI discussion, which is fascinating. Also, let me just jump in there. In this attention economy where we're fighting for students' attention, they are never more engaged than they are when they're being assessed. That's when we have their minds. And so that is the optimal time for them to be learning. So I am with you all. I am one of these geeks. I am also with you on the notion non-disposable assessment, or what I would consider authentic assessment. Same notion, having students do things that matter and that make sense to them, where they can see the connection between the assessment and their potential success in the future life. So what I'm going to talk to you about, you kind of took my punchline a little bit by telling my class size. I was going to hold off a bit on that, but we'll get there. It's okay. I'm gonna just talk about, first of all, some things that I'm passionate about and that I think, if possible, should be part of every course. And so we want to start with just experiential learning, because that's the main sort of focus of this talk. I teach these large classes, but I really want them to be grounded in the real world success. And so experiential learning, of course, is when students get to work with some external entity, a real world entity that has a real world problem they're trying to solve. And students get to become part of that process, interacting with that entity, helping them solve the problem. And sometimes, seeing real impact of the work they do that goes well beyond the assessment itself. And there's strong literature on the benefits of experiential learning. And of course, a lot of these go beyond just knowledge transfer, although there's great knowledge transfer happening there too. But we're really giving them some experience with these critical skills of success. And in an AI world, we know these skills are going to be hyper important to have. So I'm a big fan of experiential learning. It should be optimally part of every course we teach. This is going to be a theme you'll see. I'm also a big fan of teamwork, of having students work together in teams. And by the way, preferably randomly constructed teams, not teams where they get to go with all of their friends. Part of what I think we should be teaching students in university is how to interact with other students, how to listen respectfully, how to express their own ideas with sort of boldness, so to speak, how to reach consensus and collaborate effectively with others. And that's the kind of thing that teamwork really does. It helps our students learn how to interact with other humans. They're not good at it. They don't like it. They have high levels of social anxiety. And so we really need to support them well. But the only way they're ever going to get comfortable working in teams is by working in teams. And we have them for 4 years in university. And I think we should be giving them this experience as much as we can. So I think team-based projects should optimally be part of every course we teach. I'm also a big fan of something called peer assessment and self-assessment. And in fact, an entire process called formative peer and self-assessment. And so this is where I have to admit, I'm also a co-founder of an educational technology called Peer Scholar. You're going to see me talk about Peer Scholar throughout this talk because it's what I use to manage how I do things. So if there's any questions about Peer Scholar, happy to answer them. And let me just say, if there's anybody who's interested in adopting this technique and trying it, I will make sure you have access to Peer Scholar without there being any need for your institution to purchase. If your institution is interested, I'm here, but that's a different story. So what is formative peer assessment about? Just very quickly, students do some composition like they normally would in an activity, but then they submit their activity and they come to this step that I'm showing you here, where they actually get to see the work of a subset of their peers, in this case 4. And for each of their peers, we ask them to read the work carefully, to give some positive feedback about that work. What is something that student's doing really well? But of course, also to give some constructive feedback. What is at least one thing, and we really try to get them to focus on one thing. What is one thing this student might change about their work that you think would improve it significantly. And so I love this because in order to answer that question, they have to engage receptive communication, they have to read carefully, they have to use critical thinking to find potential weaknesses. They then have to use creative thinking in order to think, well, how could they do it differently? And then they need expressive communication, in fact, respectful expressive communication to communicate that potential change. And we give them a bunch of micro-learning videos to equip them about how to do this, what the challenge of giving feedback is, how to do it well. So a lot I could say about that, but they repeat this peer by peer, getting that structured practice that's so critical to developing skills. And then at the end, you see it says my work. So then they're shown their own work and they're asked to do a self-assessment. Do I have a slide? Yeah. So on the self-assessment, they would see their own work. And now the questions would be more related to metacognitive skills, really being able to think about strengths and weaknesses of your own work, how it could be improved. And then the third step of this is once they have given feedback to others and themselves, they then come in and they see the feedback that other students have given to them. So this is the formative use of feedback part. 4 different peers again. So now they have feedback from 4 peers. As you can see here, we ask them to answer some questions about the feedback. This is to teach them how to get past the negative emotions of feedback. That sort of growth mindset we talk about, I don't think it's natural. I think the natural response to feedback is to fight or flee. We all learned in graduate school how to fight back those emotions that come with feedback, get past them, and then use the feedback to grow. That's what we're trying to teach students here. So we give them a strategy for first acknowledging the negative emotions, but then getting past them by putting them in their own words. They rate the quality of the feedback they get. So every time somebody gives feedback, they ultimately see how that feedback landed. And most importantly, they're engaging with the feedback. They're not fleeing it, which is what their natural tendency is often to do. And then finally, at the end of this, after seeing all this feedback, they're told, hey, you now have an opportunity to revise your work before final submission. So if there's points in there that you think were great, go ahead and use them to make your work better and get a better mark. And the final thing we ask them to do is a reflection, kind of like a letter to the editor. What feedback did you use? What feedback didn't you use, and why? So to kind of reflect on that. So I'm a big fan of formative peer and self-assessment, and it should optimally be part of every course we teach. Okay, so then of course, perhaps little surprise to some of you, I'm going to combine all these because basically I'm a big geek about skill development, skill learning. I was originally a cognitive psychologist before really becoming educational. And I know for any skill to develop, you need to put a lot of practice into it. And so sometimes some of these things I've just told you about are things that come in the 3rd year or the 4th year when courses get smaller and more manageable. I'm going to argue that's not good enough. That we see that it takes time to develop. We have our students for 4 years. We need to be doing things in year 1. So optimally, we would have team-based experiential learning activities, including formative peer and self-assessment, that would begin in year 1 and would be continually reinforced thereafter. This is my notion of how we get students up to speed in terms of the soft skills, the skills of importance for the future, and it needs to start at year 1. Which is, of course, where we come to that point. What you're seeing here is the classroom I teach in, but what you're actually seeing is 2 quadrants out of 8. It's a theater in the round. They are all around me. It's a 500-seater, but you see they're only about 7 back, even though it's a 500-seater. None of the students are far away from me. It's a much more intimate space, forces the professor to walk around, and we have this strange, well, it's not strange, I guess it's strange, blended delivery method where I'm videotaped as I'm teaching. So there's 3 video cameras in the corners of this room. And as I teach, I am videotaped. And students are told, you have the option. You can either come to class and be part of that live lecture, or if you wish, about 2 hours after the lecture will be available online. And what we found is with about 2,000 students in the class, 2,054 this year, a 500-seater does it. We have usually about 450 students per class in the class. That makes for fun, lively classes that make for better videos for those students who are not in the class. By the way, we've done a bunch of research showing that pedagogically, it doesn't seem to matter, that the students who choose to consume the lecture primarily online don't do any better or worse than those who choose to attend the lectures. It seems like it's just more a question of fitting people's lives. They like the convenience and fitting how they prefer to engage with the content. So that works out really well, but that's my reality. So 2,000 plus students, and I've just told you everything I value. So how do we deliver that sort of learning at this sort of scale? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm just going to walk you through. It's a 9-step process, and I think the best way to explain to you what I do is to walk you through the process. And so here's how it works for me. We're just going to have one external partner. That's what's going to make this work at scale. So, you know, often experiential learning is tricky because you need to find so many partners. Sometimes you need an office on your university whose sole job it is to find connections and all this stuff. I've never had any problem myself reaching out and finding, when you tell people what I'm about to tell you, what's going to happen, they want their organization to be part of this. And so for me, it's about looking out into the world and finding an organization or finding something that I think would bring something to my classroom. And I happened to get lucky for the project we're talking about here because a woman named Mai Dong, who you see here, approached me at one point. She had started something called Swab the World. Mai is of Vietnamese descent. She had a form of cancer where she needed a stem cell donor. And it turns out the Canadian stem cell database is powerful. It's a nice big database, but it's like 80% Caucasian genes. It's even more than that, to be honest. And so if you're Caucasian, you have a pretty good chance of finding a match. But if you're not, the chances go down dramatically, and matches matter with respect to the efficacy of the stem cells donation. So what Mai is doing is trying to make young people, especially 18 to 35-year-old, especially non-Caucasian people, aware of this issue, and to encourage them to consider swabbing their cheek and adding their DNA to the Canadian database. So why is this cool for my class? Well, my class is very much multicultural. They come from the world into my classroom. They are the market that Mai wants to reach, and they are connected with the market that Mai wants to reach. And they get it. You know, this is almost personal to them when they hear the story. And so Mai became the partner. And so what you do once you have the partner, well, first you got to come up with a task. I've really come to like the idea of public service announcements. This works really well in my courses, and I've done these now a few times. And so the idea is we are going to make the students a messenger for some organization, in this case, Swab the World. They're going to be exposed to Swab the World, and that's going to happen in the following steps that I'll tell you about more. But ultimately what they're going to be asked to do, so let me kind of I'll go to step 3 because 2 and 3 kind of connect. I create a video with the partner where we talk about Swab the World, in this case, what it's all about, the story behind it, you know, the humanity, the lives that they have been able to save through matches, etc. So we try to really humanize the partner, humanize their passion, but also humanize their problem. And what Mai will say is her big problem is reaching out to all of these people that she would like to reach out to. So many people are not aware of what Swab is about. And so she ultimately, at the end of the video, does step 2. She defines the core task for the students. And she says, basically, we tell the students, we're going to put you in groups. Every group of 5 students, every group is going to simulate a small marketing company that Swab the World has approached and said, we would like your help creating a public service announcement that takes our message to some core demographic. And so what you're supposed to do is choose that target market, but then ultimately work together to come up with some sort of public service announcement that you think would be effective in terms of reaching that market, making them aware of this cause, and potentially triggering some sort of action, you know, convincing them to go swab their cheek. And so they hear about all of this again. We have a good talk with them about what a good PSA looks like. We have a rubric, a core rubric that you'll hear more about a little bit, that defines the characteristics of a good public service announcement. We do some other things. So let's talk about the teamwork thing for a little bit. We do just put them in random groups. They don't like that. I tell them your future life partner might be waiting for you in that group. You don't know. Part of university is meeting new people, getting new perspectives, interacting, etc. And so you're going to be put in a group of 5 people, and we're going to ask you to do this teamwork thing. But we're not just going to throw you in. This is one of my pet peeves of teamwork, is too many instructors throw students into it, knowing how challenging teamwork can be, even without the social anxiety of today, and then they don't give them any support, no scaffolding. And what happens? Well, stuff happens in the groups. It's not positive. It doesn't go well. The students aren't happy. The teacher isn't happy that they have to intervene, and yada, yada. A lot of this is solved if you just scaffold the task a little bit. So we have a set of videos. You can find them at videos.peerscholar.com that are all about preparing students for teamwork. And we tell them about the benefits. You know, here's what's in it for you. We use self-determination theory to kind of guide the way we present content. So we focus on their autonomy. Why should you care about becoming a good team player? What's in it for you? How is this going to benefit you? And we highlight all those sorts of things. And then we get to competency. You know, are you able to negotiate a team project well? Well, we talk about the challenges that come up. Here's all the things that you're likely to run into, but here's how to deal with those challenges when they do come up, or how to mitigate them even before to try to prevent them from coming up. So we give them a bunch of effective teamwork strategies that the whole team is now aware of, and that also sort of sets the expectations of the team. So we prepare them. I have over 400 teams doing this at the same time. So those 400 teams, they know the rubric, they use it, they work together, they try to create a powerful PSA, and they submit that draft. Okay, so we now have 450 PSAs in the system. We then take the rubric that we've created, and students now, in a second step, they see the work presented by some of the teams, a subset of the teams, and each student now applies the rubric to that work. And that means, just through fancy math, I told you these teams were 5. These teams were actually 4, now that I remember. So then we ask each member of each team to assess 6 other teams' PSAs. So that gives us 24 assessments, 24 student-based peer assessments of each PSA. And that's a really good number to get a good quantification of the quality of that PSA. And so that allows us to find a top 10. Those that make the top 10, so by the way, while students apply the rubric, they also give positive feedback and constructive feedback to this team. So they're also giving them ideas of how their PSA could be improved further. So those in the top 10, first of all, if you're not in the top 10, you're done. But those who make the top 10, they made the finals. And the finals involve the external partner coming back into the picture and being part of judging from the final 10 to the final 3. So they're allowed to resubmit their work. They're allowed to revise it if they saw good feedback that they want to incorporate into a revision of their PSA. But we asked them to revise it. And now members of our university, members of SWAB the World, in this case, they apply that same rubric and give feedback again to those 10. And they're permitted but not required to revise their work. There was something I wanted to mention, but I think I missed. But let's just finish this, and I'll go back to it really quickly. So then we have final judging with the community partner. So again, this is all managed using Peer Scholar. So we can load it in there, and then the external partners can see these, and they can assess each of those 10. And that allows us to find the top 3. So by the way, every team that makes the top 10, I write a letter of support for. I say, in order for this team to get there, they've had to have shown the following skills and abilities, blah, blah, blah. If you're looking for somebody in your lab, or you're looking for a potential employee, the student seems to be, have those sort of qualities. So everybody in the top 10 gets that letter from me. Everybody in the top 3 gets a real nice letter from Mai Dong, SWAB the World, a letter of appreciation for what they've given. And in this case, the top 3 all ended up on the SWAB the World website. It's the student's intellectual property. And so if the external partner ultimately wants to use that, now the students are encouraged to enter into discussions with that partner to set whatever rules they might want on how their content is used. I want to mention something really quickly, right here, sorry. While providing, and that's supposed to be an alternative, I've talked about, basically making people work in teams. Some students just don't want to work in teams. Some students don't like this particular activity because it's got a real medical kind of vibe to it, and some communities and such don't like the idea of encouraging people to submit their DNA to a database. So we have to provide an alternative. The alternative is people work on their own. They do the same process. They can pick any cause they want. So it doesn't have to be Swab the World. So whatever cause you want, but otherwise engage in the same thing on your own. Okay. Right, this was just saying, right, and their final PSA ends up on websites or something like that. Quick rapid round, just to let you know, we did some data collection as we were doing this. And so we've looked at, and it's funny, we had to word these things. So we're using the intrinsic motivation index items to measure things like interest, competence, and how much they value it. But there's no control group, right? All the students kind of did this activity. And so what we asked them is, if you consider your typical student activity a 4 on this scale, a 4 out of 7, where would you rate this activity in comparison? And so that dotted line you see is the average activity that they've been engaged in campus, and you see they find this one more interesting. They felt a lot of competence while doing this one. They saw the value of this activity big time. And also here, what they think of teamwork. Look at this, your score on teamwork. We're up to almost a 6 out of 7. If you do teamwork well, if you prepare them well, and by the way, I also have a peer evaluation at the end where all members of the team evaluate each other. So if they know that's coming too, they tend to engage well, and when everybody engages, it's a beautiful thing. We looked at how much this affected their opinions about medical interventions, and generally they became more positive about those, how much it impacted their sense of caring and such, and that went up too. So all nice. This should be, 2% for submitting an initial PSA, 2% for giving feedback. Not a lot of marks, and notice that none of the marks are based on the actual quality of the PSA. We're just hoping that students find this an intrinsically valuable experience and that they're putting a lot of effort into it. But we don't really just have to hope. There's the potential, like we've only seen the top 10, so there's the potential that the other 90% are just doing crappy work, and we're just seeing these 10 great ones. But we can look at, from the pure averages, how things shook out on a grander scale. And without going into any details on this, you can just kind of get a sense that this would be sort of a 50% effort on that. And you see that by and large, all of the PSAs, first of all, are showing a relatively normal distribution. It doesn't seem like some people are buying into it and others are not. And we're getting a nice distribution with a pretty high average on general. So at least in terms of how the students see these PSAs, they are producing really nice, high quality work because they see the value, the authenticity of what they're doing. All right. That's where I am. So I will say thank you. There's my name. You can find me easily on LinkedIn. I love chatting and meeting people on LinkedIn. So let me stop my share here. So please reach out. I would love to chat with you. I haven't been able to follow the chat as we were going because I wanted to try to get the timing back on track. So any questions, please feel free.
Thanks, Steve, very, very much. I think it's worth emphasizing that this is an intro to psychology. And because yes. I think if people missed that at the beginning, they might have thought it was a marketing class or something. So my question is, the learning outcomes related to psychology, are they referenced in the rubric? Are they just generally skill outcomes, as you've mentioned the importance of carrying those on, teaching them in year one and building, or are they also sort of knowledge learning outcomes?
So there's certainly some sort of knowledge connection. I don't know if I'd even call it outcomes in a way, but the idea of saying to students, why is this a psychology project? Well, what they have been learning in the course is how human attention works. And so good PSAs attract attention. They've been learning how memory works. Good PSAs are memorable. They've been learning about how human persuasion works and how to combine sort of rational, logical arguments with more emotional cues, like what you associate things with, and that, the way advertisers. So really, the PSA is an application of a lot of the things they're learning in the course, applying it towards a real world problem. So certainly those ideas of letting them see the relevance of their knowledge and how it fits, but also, of course, highlighting the skills that they're learning along the way, the human collaborative skills, the critical thinking, and all of those sort of things. So that's sort of my thing. I like to say I like big classes. I love teaching big classes. I just love a full room, but I don't like multiple choice exams. I don't like summative assessment. I like to use formative assessment approaches to try to build those skills. And that's my real core objective in these, is to really get them engaging those skills.
Right now, when those first year students leave, do they have similar experiences in year 2, 3, and 4, building the skills that you've really introduced so well in this activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we all know in higher ed, unfortunately, it's a bit of a hit and miss, that there are still many of our colleagues who teach the way they were taught. And they just, it worked for them. It felt good for them. They've seen their favorite professor do it a certain way, and that's the way they do it. But the way the professor did it 20 years ago is not behind the times, literally. So I try. So at University of Toronto, we have formative peer and self-assessment in over 80 courses a term now, thanks to the widespread use of Peer Scholar. And that's becoming more common in a lot of Peer Scholars now in 10 countries. So that part is becoming a little more in the water. This bravery of doing a 2,000 student experiential learning course, I've had trouble getting other people to do that. And as a result, it's more palatable to professors in 3rd or 4th year. But that's really what, and I thank you for giving the stage, because really what I would like to do, if any of you are teaching big classes, if any of you are interested in this, no financial issues at stake here. If you want to do it, I will support you 100%. And I would just love to see this done a little more.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve, very, very much. Eliana?
Yeah, but there's a question in the Q&A.
Okay, so let me peek through. Did you want to just highlight it?
There was one from the last session in the Q&A, but I don't see any new ones.
It's helpful not
Okay.
to post that.
Yes, there's a question from Karen.
Oh, yes, it's from the last session.
I will read it. Teams
go ahead.
comprised of students who prefer to meet in person and those who prefer to meet virtually. I'm thinking of the fact that your class is high flex and the student body that might, yes, the student body that might attract.
Yeah, so I mean, when they work together in Peer Scholar, it's like a Google Doc. They're in a shared collaborative space where they can leave comments for each other, but they also have each other's email addresses, so they can reach out, and we encourage them to have some sort of meeting. I would love to say a bunch of them meet face to face. I could give a whole other talk on social anxiety, the fear of negative evaluation, and how it's having such a horrible impact on them. They're scared to meet face to face for the most part. So my bet is, even if they're side by side in rooms, there's probably still meeting virtually for the most part to do their group work. Yeah, I'm not happy about that. I can, but that's another problem I'm trying to solve. Yeah,
We had a question regarding assigning higher values to the assignment. The assessment.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of almost in line with the previous speaker, that I'm worried, there's this concept from psychology called the overjustification hypothesis, that once you make the external rewards for something too large, then they just try to get those external rewards. You lose the intrinsic motivation. It turns into extrinsic motivation. They're just thinking, what do I have to do to get the rewards? So I intentionally, even though this is a capstone project, the last thing they do in the course, I intentionally want it to be not about getting marks, but about having an impact, of doing some work that matters. And I think that I do everything, including self-determination theory, by the way. If people don't know it, it's a theory of how to produce high levels of intrinsic motivation. And that's everything that's gone into this design, is about trying to make students value this and really embrace it and kind of dig into it for those reasons. So I would be a little wary making it worth too much. I would worry that you might spoil things a little bit.
It's an interesting idea.
Hmm.
Thanks. Thank you again so much for sharing, Steve, especially on such a busy day for you when you're wearing two hats
Yeah.
at once.
I'm about to go do a pitch now, so it's all great. But thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing with this organization and all of you who embrace alternative assessment. I think it's so important to our future education. So it's great to have a community around all of this. Thank you.